Do you believe that a marriage signed on paper can turn into a real love story? She was Claire Bennett, a passionate landscape designer who once dreamed of building green spaces that could heal people's souls. He was Ethan Caldwell, the cold heir to one of New York's most powerful construction empires, a man who lived by logic, numbers, and total control. 3 years ago, a sudden financial collapse pushed Claire's family company to the brink of ruin. On a rainy afternoon, inside the glass-walled 48th floor office of Caldwell Corporation, her mother made the hardest decision of her life: to marry her daughter off in order to save the family legacy. There was no proposal, no love, no emotion, just a straightforward deal. Claire would become Ethan's wife and uphold the image of a stable, perfect couple for investors. In return, the Bennett family's massive debt would be wiped clean. They had a luxurious yet soulless wedding. A sophisticated wedding gown, smiles posed for the press, and two strangers stepping into a marriage like lead actors in a carefully scripted play. No one, not even themselves, knew that the real story was only just beginning. 3 years, 1,080 mornings, all identical. 1,080 nights, ending in silence. Claire Bennett had lived like a shadow inside her own marriage, quiet, invisible, unnoticed. In 3 years of being Ethan Caldwell's wife, she had never once fallen asleep in his arms, never laughed with him on the couch, never heard her name spoken with any trace of emotion beyond polite acknowledgement. Each morning, she rose before the sun, 5:30 a.m. in the guest room of the Caldwell estate, a room once meant for temporary visitors, now permanently hers. Claire didn't sleep beside her husband. They had separate doors, separate rhythms. Her habits had been trimmed down to perfection, quiet, tidy, punctual, and invisible. She walked through the long marble hallway, warm yellow light glowing softly on her bare feet. Every stone tile, every piece of decor was expensive, yet not a single ounce of warmth existed in those walls. Even the air felt filtered through some aesthetic standard only Ethan could define. She made breakfast for her husband every day. Ethan came downstairs at precisely 6:15, never late, never early. Claire learned his preferences not through dialogue, but through quiet watching. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Thick toast, no butter, no jam. She studied him the way one studies a silent language, each gesture, each breath, each flick of his gaze, but Ethan never studied her. He never looked, never asked, never noticed. When she placed the coffee on the black granite counter, Ethan entered, impeccably dressed in his tailored suit, jet black hair slicked back, steel gray eyes that slid past her like she wasn't there. He picked up the cup, eyes on his phone, scanning emails, then vanished into the garage, gone in a silver car like a breeze that never stopped to feel the room. Claire remained, alone at the table, chewing her toast in silence, staring out the panoramic window at the only thing in this house that bore her fingerprint: the garden. 3 years ago, Ethan had allowed her to redesign the backyard. Provided she didn't spend much, Claire poured her soul into it. Clusters of lavender, climbing roses, a small koi pond with gliding golden fish. No one entered that garden but her. By day, she nurtured the plants. By night, she dined alone, slept alone. No one asked where she went, what she thought, how she felt. In this 7,000 square foot mansion, she was merely another high-end furnishing, like the abstract painting in the living room, admired but never touched. And Ethan? He lived like a machine. Wake up on time, work on schedule, dress correctly, speak only what needed to be said. In 3 years, Claire could count on one hand how many times he had looked her directly in the eye. They were married, on paper, in public, in legal documents, but in their hearts, they were nothing. When guests came, they performed, smiles polished, gestures rehearsed, just enough closeness to fool a camera. But when the door shut, the act ended. They resumed their roles, strangers sharing space, avoiding collision. Claire didn't cry anymore. Even her tears had given up. She had learned how to exist in stillness, like a bonsai in a glass case. Alive, but never growing, because Ethan had never once watered her with affection. Until one morning, her phone lit up with something that hadn't happened in 3 years. Ethan Caldwell is calling. Claire never thought she'd appear in public as Ethan Caldwell's wife, but on a Thursday morning the unthinkable happened. Her phone buzzed while she was tending the lavender in the garden. Seeing Ethan's name on the screen made her frown. He had never called her during work hours. His voice, as always, was cool and precise. "I need you to accompany me to an event tonight. 7 p.m. Manhattan Business Club." She hesitated. "Why now?" "It's a matter of image. You're my wife. It's time we act like it." Click, no further explanation. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unease and questions. After 3 years of invisibility, why this sudden spotlight? She went to the mall using the credit card Ethan had given her long ago, one she rarely touched. With the help of a skilled saleswoman, Claire chose a sapphire blue silk dress. Elegant enough, eye-cocking enough. She did her hair and soft makeup, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. At exactly 6:50 p.m., she descended the stairs. Ethan was waiting in the foyer, navy suit, ash gray tie, as expressionless as ever. But when he looked up at her, there was something unfamiliar in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even admiration? "You look fine," she nodded, offering nothing more. The event was grander than she imagined. Familiar names from financial magazines floated past her in tailored silence. Ethan stood beside her, introducing her with a line he repeated all evening. "This is my wife, Claire." No tenderness, no real smile. He felt like a designer accessory, required but not valued. Then he appeared. Julian Stone. Younger than Ethan, but with the eyes of someone who'd lived deeply, he approached not with haste, but with the ease of someone who already knew her loneliness. "I've heard of you," he said, kissing the back of her hand. "Ethan's wife is far more stunning than I imagined." For the first time in 3 years, Claire felt like more than furniture. She felt seen, not as a wife, not as a role, but as herself. Their conversation began politely, but quickly drifted into genuine connection. Julian spoke of his eco-resort projects along California's coast, solar-powered, nature-integrated, sustainable designs. Claire, almost without realizing, leaned in with questions about materials, water systems, energy models, vision. Her eyes lit up, not for Julian, but because her old dreams were waking. "You studied landscape design, didn't you?" "Yes, but I don't practice anymore." "That's a shame. You speak like someone still dreaming in detail." Ethan stood a few feet away. He didn't interrupt, but his gaze grew colder by the second. He saw the way she leaned in, saw her smile, genuine, unguarded. And what struck Ethan hardest wasn't Julian, it was Claire's eyes. Because for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't looking at him. She wasn't waiting for his reaction. She was radiant without needing his presence. Before leaving, Julian slipped her a business card. "I'd love to hear more of your ideas. Maybe we could collaborate, if you're interested." Claire looked down at the card, and in that quiet moment, a door creaked open inside her. And the light of old dreams began to filter in, soft, unannounced, and impossibly tempting. Claire couldn't remember exactly what she said when she got in the car, but one thing was certain, the silence wasn't the same anymore. For 3 years, silence was their unspoken language, a mutual agreement to avoid depth, pain, connection. But tonight, that silence had gained weight, texture, sharp corners that cut through the air between them. Ethan started the engine. Claire sat quietly, her hand resting over her purse where Julian's business card waited, like a fracture waiting to deepen. Streetlights flickered across Ethan's face, drawing shadows beneath his eyes. Neither of them spoke, but inside him, something had begun to crack. Claire broke the silence first. "Are you jealous?" Ethan didn't turn, but his grip on the wheel tightened. Julian was being kind. He didn't cross a line. "And what about you?" His voice was low, heavy. "You were okay letting another man look at you like that?" "At least," Claire said, staring ahead, "someone looked at me." The car jerked to a stop in front of the house. Neither of them moved. "Do you even know?" Claire began, voice calm but full of steel. "What it's been like living here?" Ethan looked at her, truly looked. But Claire didn't need his eyes. She needed his presence, his truth, his voice. 3 years, she said. 3 years of making your coffee, preparing meals, waiting in silence. Not because I had to, but because I hoped you'd notice I was still here. "Claire," Ethan breathed out, almost shaking. "No, don't Claire me, let me finish." She had never spoken this way. This wasn't the submissive, careful Claire. This was a woman on fire. "You don't love me. I know that. But I'm still human, Ethan. I feel, I dream. I'm not a goddamn decoration you display and forget." Ethan said nothing, not because he didn't have words, but because none of them felt worthy now. "I didn't know how to let you in," he finally whispered. "You made me unsure of who I was." Claire blinked. That wasn't Ethan, the man who always had plans, answers, control. "I made you unsure of who you were," she repeated. "Then who were you while I died next to you?" Silence fell between them, dense and final. Ethan lowered his gaze. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that if I let you in, you'd see there was nothing inside." And Claire saw it then. Not coldness, not cruelty, just fear. She didn't know whether to scream or forgive him. The next morning, when Claire walked into the kitchen, something had changed. Ethan was already there. Shirt half buttoned, coffee brewing, toast still warm. The smell of butter and caffeine filled the space like life. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep." Ethan looked at her and didn't look away. "I thought all night about you, about what you said." Claire said nothing. She sat, touched the cup, hot, real, like the first time something mattered. "Claire," Ethan took a breath. "If you want to work again, follow your dreams, even if it means leaving, then do it. You have every right." "You're saying this to prove a point?" she asked, voice steady. "No, not to prove anything, just if you stay, I don't want you here like a ghost, I want you to live." Claire smiled, soft, sad. Then for the first time, she said, "You'll have to learn how to live too." That morning they drank coffee together, not as husband and wife, but as two souls trying to learn how to exist side by side. Claire sat in the library late into the night, her laptop still open, the subject line glowing softly. "A new beginning? Julian Stone." She had read the email early that morning, but she still hadn't replied, not out of indecision, but because inside her, two voices were clashing. Julian didn't use many words. He sent a clear offer: lead landscape architect on an eco-resort project in Carmel, California. Coastal, immersed in nature, renewable energy, sustainable design. 18 months, good salary, independence, no labels, no need to be Ethan Caldwell's wife. At the end of the message, one line: "If an old door closes, try knocking on the one called your dream." Claire leaned back. In her mind, she saw two opposing worlds, like two blueprints drawn in different languages. One world was Julian, a door opening toward freedom, a place where no one knew who she had been, where no one whispered behind champagne glasses. There, she could be herself again, the Claire from university days, sketching wild garden layouts in the margins of textbooks, laughing without watching for permission. And Julian offering nothing but space. He stood like a gentle doorman, waiting. The other world was Ethan, the man who once made her feel invisible, now fumbling his way toward presence. His change was small but real, a glance held longer, a morning greeting, a silence that finally invited her in. This world offered no guarantees, but it held something fragile, sacred even. the chance to step inside a heart that had always been locked. The next day, Claire met Julian. They sat in a modest cafe, nothing grand, just warm. Sunlight streamed in, catching golden strands in her hair. "I didn't come to say yes," she said. "And I didn't come to hear one," Julian replied gently. "I just want you to know, you have a choice." He didn't speak much about the project. Instead, he painted Carmel with his words. The shoreline paths, the hush of the morning tide, the smell of rosemary in the breeze. Claire listened. She imagined herself there, hands in the dirt, sketching garden paths by the sea. She heard laughter inside her chest, a sound missing for 3 years. "Claire," Julian said quietly, "I don't want you to choose me. I want you to choose yourself." That night, Claire didn't go to the living room. She went to the library, her quiet place of decisions. Ethan appeared minutes later. He didn't interrupt. She turned to him. "Do you know what I'm thinking?" "No," he said, "and for the first time, I want to listen instead of assume." Claire took a breath. "Julian offers me a door, a life where I'm no one but me. I won't be someone's wife. I won't be contained in marble and silence." Ethan nodded, his gaze soft but steady. "I know. But," she paused, "here, with you, I have something I never had before, acknowledgement. And if that's real, if you truly want to change, then I need to know I'm not the only one starting over." Ethan stepped closer. "I've lived my life like a beautiful building, hollow inside. You were the first to knock, and I didn't know how to open, but if you give me time, I will learn." Claire held his gaze. The anger was gone. What remained was a woman standing between two worlds. And for the first time, the choice belonged to her. Claire wasn't expecting anything special that day. The morning rain was light, the world soaked in a soft gray that felt like a blanket thrown over unnamed emotions. She made her coffee, poured it into her usual cup, and paused before pouring a second. Ethan no longer came down at the same time every morning. He'd let her live at her own rhythm, and she appreciated that. But today, at exactly 6:15, she heard footsteps behind her. "You still like rainy mornings, don't you?" Ethan asked, his voice low, no longer cold. Claire turned around. He stood there in a plain shirt, no tie, no CEO demeanor. Just a man, quiet and slightly nervous. "Is something wrong?" she asked, placing the second cup of coffee on the counter. He nodded. "Will you come with me for a bit? There's something I want to show you." The car didn't turn toward the office. It didn't head to any place familiar. They drove through the heart of the city, past the high-rises, until they reached a low, quiet building beside a tree-lined park. Ethan parked the car, silent. They stepped into a glass-walled meeting room with views of open green. On the table lay a stack of papers. Claire glanced at the title, Transfer of Assets and Shares, Ethan Caldwell. She turned to him. "What is this?" "It's everything I used to keep you bound to me. Power, money, control." He looked her in the eyes. "I don't want to hold you with those things anymore." "You're transferring them?" "I've sold most of my shares, stepped down from the board," he exhaled. "I want to start over, from zero. Not as the man you feared, the one who controlled everything, including you." Claire stood still, part of her stunned, another part trembling. "You did all this for me?" "No," Ethan shook his head. "I did it for me, because for the first time in my life, I want to live without armor. And if you choose to be in that life, it would mean everything. But if not, I'll still live honestly." They left the building and walked through the park in silence. The rain had faded, leaving a sharp scent of wet grass and soft earth, calming everything restless inside them. Under a tall tree, Ethan stopped. He turned to her, and for the first time in 3 years of marriage, he knelt down. No diamond ring, no lavish setup, just a small white gold band. Simple and elegant, like the very first smile Claire had ever given him on a day long forgotten. "Claire Bennett," he said, voice steady but soft, "I have nothing to offer but my heart. An imperfect heart that finally knows how to love." Claire stared at him, throat tightening. "I loved you from the moment I met you, but I was too good at hiding. You made me feel small because you were real and I was just surviving. I never asked you to be perfect," she whispered. "Then will you give me a chance?" He looked up, his eyes bright but vulnerable. Not to continue this broken marriage, but to start over as two strangers who might fall in love. "Will you let me date you?" Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she bent down and helped him to his feet. Her embrace wasn't quick forgiveness. It was a quiet acceptance that they had broken, that they had hurt, but maybe they were strong enough to try again. "We can start from the beginning," she whispered. "No husband, no wife, no contracts. Just Claire and Ethan." He held her close, no promises, no need for them, because for the first time, their love came not from condition, but from choice. That night, Claire moved into another room, not in anger, but to give them both the space to begin again. She wrote a single line on the whiteboard in her new room: "First date, Saturday morning, 9 a.m. at the cafe." Then quietly taped it to Ethan's door. The next morning, he replied with a neat note: "I'll be there on time, and this time, I'll ask what you like to drink." Claire smiled. It wasn't an ending. It wasn't a dramatic new beginning, but it was real. It was a chance, finally, to love each other as if they'd never hurt each other at all. 6 months later, Claire walked into the Caldwell Corporation building with a completely new title: Director of the Sustainable Development Division. No longer the chairman's wife, no longer a shadow behind oak doors. She had her own office, her own team, and a dream that had never really died. Ethan had suggested her name, but it was the board who approved her. Claire's green development plan had taken them by surprise. Bold, practical, ambitious in all the right ways. No one looked at her with pity anymore. They called her Claire Bennett, not Mrs. Caldwell. Every morning they went to work together, but walked into different offices, different teams, different floors. They learned how to function as true partners. Claire never hesitated to challenge Ethan in leadership meetings. Ethan never pulled rank to silence her. "I don't agree with that investment strategy," she had once said in front of the entire board. Ethan simply nodded. "Then let's re-examine the data." At night, they went home together, sometimes silent, sometimes debating business decisions, but always within the safe boundary of a love that had grown out of mutual respect. Claire didn't move back into the master bedroom. They kept their agreement, love again from the beginning. On Fridays, Ethan would still knock on her door with a quiet invitation. "Want to go for a walk?" Or, "I have a design draft I'd like your thoughts on." They hadn't talked about marriage again, but they no longer needed a contract to stay. They were held together by choice, willing coexistence, not obligation. One Wednesday afternoon, while reviewing documents for a new urban project, Claire received an email from Julian. "Claire, I'm leaving New York this weekend. There's an opening in Morocco, another new path as always. But I didn't want to go without saying goodbye. If you have time, meet me at the old cafe, 7 p.m. tomorrow. If not, just know I'm happy for you. Not because you chose Ethan, but because you finally chose yourself." Claire went. Julian was the same, graceful, composed, no bitterness in his eyes, no questions about Ethan. "I'll miss this city," he said, sipping mint tea. "You're always leaving," Claire smiled softly. "Yes, but this time I want to leave something behind." He handed her a worn leather notebook. Inside was Claire's first landscape sketch, back when she was an intern at his firm. "This was the piece that convinced me you could change a city," he said. "I believe I can now," Claire answered gently. They didn't hug, didn't promise to stay in touch. There was only a quiet gaze, deep, peaceful, as if all the unsaid things had already been forgiven, and all the old hopes had been gently put down. When Claire returned home, Ethan was waiting on the rooftop terrace. He didn't ask what Julian had said. He simply handed her a glass of white wine and said, "Tomorrow's going to be sunny. Do you want to go somewhere?" Claire leaned her head on his shoulder, looking at the glittering lights of the city beyond. "I want to go anywhere," she said, "as long as you're there, not holding my hand, not needing a title, just there, quiet and real." And they sat together, two people, once broken, now slowly piecing together a life that wasn't perfect, but was finally whole. 6 months of learning each other again, not just in work, but in love, had brought Claire and Ethan closer than ever. Then, one early summer afternoon, Ethan suggested something they'd never truly had before: a real honeymoon. No contracts, no obligations. Just them. A small suitcase sat neatly by the door. Claire checked their passports one last time, then turned to Ethan, who was awkwardly folding white shirts as if he'd never packed before. "Are you sure you need 5 white shirts for a beach trip?" she asked, smiling. Ethan looked up, a little embarrassed. "I'm not sure about anything, but this is our first real honeymoon. I just want to get it right." Claire walked over and placed her hand over his. "You don't have to get it right. Just make it real." They called it a honeymoon, though neither could remember the exact date of their wedding anymore. Their marriage had begun with a contract, defined by terms and signatures and cold legality. But now, as Claire boarded the plane beside Ethan, there were no more conditions, just love. It wasn't a lavish destination, just a quiet island, rich in trees, poor in distractions. A place where no one knew their names, no titles, no meetings, no polished images. Here, Ethan was the man who fumbled over coffee making, and Claire, the woman who laughed loudly when the wind messed up her hair. They lounged under palm trees, reading from the same chair, sometimes arguing over who got the highlighter, sometimes pretending not to notice whose turn it was to make tea. No flowers, no wedding cake, just lingering glances, as if missing even one moment might mean regret. On the last night, sitting together on the sand, Claire rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. The sea breeze carried the salt and warmth of something beautifully simple and true. "I used to think love meant perfection," Ethan whispered. "No mistakes, no breaking, no hurt. But you showed me. Sometimes love is accepting every part that's still healing." Claire squeezed his hand. "And still choosing each other, every day." They sat in silence for a long time. Nothing more needed to be said. Everything that mattered had been shown in the way they chose to stay. Tomorrow they would return to meetings, deadlines, pressure, late nights, but this time they weren't strangers. They were two souls that had once lost each other, hurt each other, then chose to come back bravely. And love, after all, was never meant to be perfect. It was the quiet promise whispered each day. Today, I still choose you, and I still choose you.